All right, hi everyone. We're going to get started. All right, so I am Sarah Weir Cooper. I'm Executive Director of New Directions in the American Landscape. NDAL was founded in 1990. We're an educational organization dedicated to the art, culture, and science of ecology-based landscape design. And put simply, we're passionate about landscaping with the natural and social world in mind. So if you're new to the NDAL world, we want to welcome you to our educational community. For 37 years, passionate landscape professionals have attended our annual symposia, and now in more recent years, we're really excited to open this expertise up to home gardeners, students, educators, through more diverse programming. We're really excited to have you here today, and I want to invite you to feel free to write in the chat where you're tuning in from. So I'm going to introduce Larry Weaner. If you don't already know him, I'm gonna get my window right here. Larry Weaner founded Larry Weaner Landscape Associates in 1982 and its educational affiliate New Directions American Landscape in 1990. His nationally recognized work combines horticulture, landscape design, and ecological restoration and spans more than 20 US states and UK. His book, Garden Revolution, How Our Landscapes Can Be a Source of Environmental Change, co-authored with Tom Christopher, received an American Horticultural Society Book Award in 2017. So Lara, feel free to unmute and join video. You are all here on our August garden chat. We're going to have one of these each season, hopefully. So the next one is going to be in November. And we're just here to answer your questions about ecological gardening. So thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all for being here. This would be a pretty boring event if nobody showed up. So we're very appreciative that you folks are here listening to what we have to say, and I'm here to listen to what you have to say or ask. One request, no real hard ones, please. It's been
Treat them
a long
softball.
day. No, only kidding. Hit me with whatever you got. I'll do my best. So,
So
Sarah, why don't you
yes, how this is going to
start?
work is we have a Q&A bar. So in your toolbar, in the Zoom toolbar, go to Q&A or more and then Q&A, and that's where you can type in your questions. And we have some pre-written in questions from email, so I have some of those as well. And please feel free to upvote once we have questions in the Q&A bar so we can prioritize the most popular ones. So we'll go until 6:30 and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So if possible, keep your questions on the more concise side, and then we can get through some more. Okay, so we're going to start with some of these pre-sent questions. So Glenn, we plan to shallow drill seed a high visibility meadow mix in November. There'll be 2 applications of herbicide, with one being next week and the second planned 10 days prior to seeding. They don't want a grass cover crop such as wheat, rye, and definitely not ryegrass included in this fall's seeding. What are several early growing yet short-lived forbs which could be included to give spring 2026 growth and yet not be overwhelming? That's the first question from him.
Very good question. And as far as what are some of the species, the terminology that is used to describe the species that you're asking about are ruderal species. They tend to be plants that seeds germinate very quickly. They grow quickly, they form seed, they're not competitive, and they're short-lived. And they are generally best combined in a seed mix with the opposite type of plant, which are those that germinate more slowly, grow more slowly, but are very long-lived. So they're very compatible. In other words, those ruderal species that the questioner is referring to are the first things that you see, the first things that flower. And if you look underneath them, there's little tiny seedlings of the slower growing plants that are going to supplant them and provide the species that would persist over the long term. But to answer the question specifically, what are the species that fulfill that ruderal plant role? The one that comes to mind first, that's most common and almost everybody is familiar with, is black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia hirta. It should be pointed out that Rudbeckia hirta, the common black-eyed Susan, is a biennial. It falls in the category of the plants that the questioner asked about. But there are other Rudbeckias that are perennial and long-lived. So Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia hirta, it's a biennial. It'll put out leaves the first year. It'll flower profusely the second year, and it will more or less drop out or become a minor player after that and be supplanted by longer-term species. What are some of the other plants that fall in that category? There are two Monardas, Monarda citriodora. Don't even know what the common name is for that. I apologize for that. Monarda punctata, which is called dotted mint. A couple different Coreopsis species, Coreopsis tinctoria, which is more of an annual plant that would have a presence the first year and then a small or a non-existent presence beyond that. Coreopsis lanceolata, lance leaf Coreopsis, which would bloom kind of a short-lived perennial. Some of these are annual, one-year plants, perennials, two-year plants, excuse me, biennials, two-year plants, perennials that are short-lived perennials beyond the 2 years. That's Coreopsis lanceolata or lance-leafed Coreopsis. So those are some of the plants that there are, it's a fairly long list. And of course, it depends on where you're planting a meadow. The species that would be adapted to Seattle, and I saw there's someone here from Seattle, are not exactly the same as the species that would be adapted to Indiana. And I saw someone is here from Indiana, or Saybrook, Connecticut, someone here from there too. So the idea is to understand the concept of ruderal / short-lived species that will dominate in the early stage and look up what are the plants that fall in that category that are native to your specific region. Now, the ones that I just put out there are pretty widespread, and so they are likely to be applicable, but there are also likely to be applicable other ones, other species that are also applicable but specific to your area. Which brings me to the point that it's about asking, understanding how to do this is what are the species, but also understanding what are the different categories of species that you need to include, and then look up the plants that are native to your area that fall in that category.
And by the
Not
way,
particularly concise. Sarah asked me to be very concise so we can get a lot of them in. I didn't really do that there. I'll try to be more concise going forward.
no, it was nice and informative. Thank you. I was gonna say Monarda citriodora lemon bee balm. I just did
Thank
a
you,
Google of that.
Sarah. Lemon bee balm, that is correct.
And then I just wanted to get your answer on the second question from Glenn, because I think you've answered this in a way prior to this that makes me feel like it would be really helpful here. What seeding rate per square foot would you recommend for each individually or collectively as the short-lived group?
Well, we don't really distinguish in the seeds per square foot between the short and the long-lived plants, in terms of how we put together a mix. But we do, and one of the first thing that first things that happens is to determine a seeds per square foot number for a particular mix. And it generally falls typically between 80 seeds per square foot and 120 seeds per square foot. It can go as high as 200 seeds per square foot. It depends on budget. If you are primarily planting plants that are big and aggressive and take up a lot of space, you don't need as many seeds per square foot. So things like the perennial monardas or bergamot or oxeye sunflower, these are big plants that take up a lot of space. So 80, 90, 100 seeds per square foot might be perfectly adequate if those plants are included. If more diminutive species are included, things like blazing star or butterfly weed, then the seed count might be up to 120 just because individual plants don't take up as much space and you need more plants to have a dense intermingled weed suppressive and native plant dominated meadow or landscape.
Okay, we have a question from Cynthia in Elkins Park, PA. It's an HOA development that allows homeowners to plant perennials and shrubs in their front gardens. The HOA had to dig up their front last year to get to sewer pipes. We took the opportunity, plus last year's drought that killed an area of Pachysandra, to plant a bunch of native shade perennials and shrubs. Most look okay, but some don't seem to be thriving. Parentheses, Jacob's ladder. The soil is quite stony. and dry shade being underneath dogwood and silver maple trees. While my gardening partner is watering the plantings, should we amend the soil with a topping of bagged compost? The HOA mulches all beds with shredded hardwood bark. Could that be causing issues such as nutrient depletion?
Well, to answer your question, first of all, you're on the right track in terms of using compost, some type of composted leaf mold as organic matter for that type of landscape, as opposed to hardwood or shredded bark mulch. Perennials are not that adapted to that kind of a mulch. It's not the death knell that you, if you put it in there, but if you really want to do the right thing for more shade tolerant or woodland perennials, composted leaf mold is the better mulch to use. In terms of dry shade, that's a certain condition, and you can look up what plants can tolerate dry shade, such as false Solomon seal. Jacob's ladder that you mentioned is actually not a bad one at all for dry shade. Uh, uh, there's a sedum ternatum or the native sedum, which does really well in dry shade. But again, all of these conditions, you can look those conditions up regard within the area that you are gardening and find out what are the native plants that tolerate dry shade, that tolerate moist shade, same conditions in the sun. And that's where you're really drawing the plants from. And I'll finish answering this question with it's lovely to hear from someone from Elkins Park because I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia and Tookenny Creek Parkway, who this person I'm sure knows about, is a place that was one of the first places I wandered around in nature in my early days before I could get in a car and drive somewhere far. So very cool to hear someone from Elkins Park.
Okay, we have a question here. Suggestions for a matrix grass or sedge for northern New Jersey. I already have little blue stem and prairie dropseed, full sun location, looking for something low growing to fill in and knit everything together.
Well, you're on the right track with little blue stem. Prairie dropseed tends to be difficult to establish from seed in the east. While it is native in the eastern US, it's only native to very specific places. And so consequently, it's a plant you can usually get to work in a planting live plants. It doesn't usually come from seed. Little blue stem, absolutely. Uh, um, Purple top or Tridens flavus is another really good one. Another really good one would be either blue gamma grass or side oats gamma grass are also two very good ones. And if you want a low grass that really has a beautiful airy texture and flower, one called Hordeum jubatum or barley oat grass is one that is seldom used, but is really a beautiful and very easy to grow from seed grass. Now, if you mentioned it's little blue stem that you're using, I'm assuming it's in the sun because that plant is a sun-loving plant. If you're in the woods, it's a whole nother suite of plants if you're in the shade.
Donna's question, we have limited staff to maintain stormwater ponds and a meadow, a lot of burnweed, Erictites, Iraxifolia. Could you provide a list of good ground cover natives that can block out weeds during the growing period of a meadow or stormwater pond, low growing, like no more than 6 inches high?
Well, of course, it depends if you're in the lower area of the basin where it's going to have much more moisture than on the slopes, which are upland and pretty dry, which is one of the issues with basins that have steep slopes. You have very varied conditions over very short distances. So that can be somewhat problematic. But some of the plants that I think are really good weed inhibitors would be some of the mountain mints. There are mountain mints that will do well on the drier slope, and other mountain mints, let's say upland mountain mint or Pycnanthum tenuifolium would be a great plant for weed suppression on the moist. Pycnanthum muticum or hoary mountain mint would be a great one. And if it's really wet, where the moisture tends to be retained for longer periods of time after it rains, then Prognathlon virginiana or Virginia mountain mint would be a really good one. And it seems like we are having a little bit of delay here. Hopefully you're hearing me. Are we okay, Sarah?
Yeah, there's a bit of a spotty connection. Not sure if it's on your end or mine. I
Yeah,
hope that folks are
I'm
I
connected via a wire here, so I'm not
Ethernet.
even
I thought
I
so.
should be good.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
all right. I hope folks are hearing him
Yeah.
okay. The audio seems to be coming through better than the video right now. I'm not sure why. Let's see if we can,
All right. Well, the audio is more important. I'm
yeah.
not particularly wonderful to look at. Hopefully, more worthwhile to say. So,
All right, here we go. Kathy, how would you eliminate or control both invasive Bermuda grass, wiregrass, and Japanese siltgrass that have heavily infiltrated a large established native forb bed about 50 feet by 20 feet that is in full sun? This bed is located in the middle of a lawn and has been in existence for about 18 years. Thanks for any help. These two invasive grasses are ruining the appearance of the bed.
yeah, the plants that you mentioned are all very different. Bermuda grass is a perennial grass that is a warm season grass, meaning it doesn't actively grow in the spring. It grows more actively in the hot weather. Stilt grass is an annual, meaning and it is a problematic weed. However, ki uh, the plant is not going to live through the winter. It's an annual. What's going to come up next year are the seeds from that plant. And what was the third plant that was asked about, Sarah?
Japanese siltgrass.
No, there's still grass. I said that. There was
Well, they
still
said
grass
Bermuda grass and then parentheses wiregrass.
and wiregrass. Now, wiregrass, sometimes common names can be a little confusing, but what I know as wiregrass is a native grass that is actually much prized and difficult to grow in the southeastern U.S., like southern Georgia and down in Florida. So I'm not quite sure if that's what the question is referring to. That's a native grass that restoration ecologists are actually put a lot of effort into establishing, not always successfully. On the other hand, Bermuda grass is usually a weed if you're trying to establish native landscape, and so is stilt grass. So stilt grass is an annual. Of course, the first question comes up, particularly with these problematic weeds, is do you want to do it with herbicide or do you want to do it organically? There's obviously very different approaches depending on what someone's view is on that. So it's a pretty broad question. Uh, uh, but if herbicide is on the table, for instance, stiltgrass is a grass. And if you plant broadleaf plants, in other words, broadleaf perennial flowers or shrubs in with that grass, there are herbicides that only kill grass. So if you plant all kinds of flowers into stiltgrass and then come in for a year or two and spray it with a grass-specific herbicide, that will only kill the stiltgrass. It won't kill anything else you planted, assuming you didn't plant other grasses. That allows the plants that you did plant to form a dense, solid cover. Now, the stiltgrass plants are all going to die over the winter. What's going to come back next year are the seeds they dispersed. But if you have formed a solid cover of the plants that you want there, they're going to suppress the germination of those stiltgrass seeds. Not every single seed will not germinate, but the majority of them won't. And you'll be able to go in and instead of have an area that's infiltrated with stiltgrass, they'll be here and there, and you can go in and remove them. So that's the herbicide way. Looking at stiltgrass from an organic standpoint, you're still trying to get to a point where you have a dense cover of plants to suppress seed germination because the stilt grass can only persist over time if the seeds can germinate. And one of the very concrete rules of ecology and how plants operate in nature is if there's a dense cover, seeds germinate at a very low rate. And if your weed is an annual like stiltgrass, you need to get a dense cover and that plant will germinate at a very low rate and consequently will be easy to pick off those that find their way through. But if you have plants scattered around, not dense, not filling in, not touching, not intermingled, but you have a plant here, an open space, and a plant there, an open space, and a plant there, an open space, then the stiltgrass just seeds just continue to germinate because they're not being suppressed. So from an organic standpoint, the best way to get to where you want to be, meaning a dense cover of native plants that are suppressing the seeds of the annual stiltgrass, is to plant those plants, weed whip the stiltgrass as it comes up in between, but don't weed whip the plants you planted, allowing them to eventually, after a year or two, form a dense cover. And then the stiltgrass problem becomes very manageable. Now, you'll notice that the herbicide way happens right away, and the organic way is more of a transition over time. Plant some plants, weed whip the stiltgrass in between until they form a cover, and then you're in pretty good shape. And that is one of the differences I think that ecology-based landscape presents from traditional gardening. If you are willing to have a period of transferal from the undesirable to the desirable, you can avoid a lot of chemicals. If you need to kill it and plant it and have something right away, it becomes, in some cases, tough to do or more difficult to do organically without chemicals. And so I would advocate as a general proclivity or way that we are moving into in landscape design and implementation and management is to get away from this immediate transformation and start moving into more gradual moving from one thing to another. And I think we can get away from a lot of chemicals in that regard by operating that way.
This kind of leads us into this question. So, Susanna, I work for the Philadelphia Water Department on green stormwater infrastructure. Many of our systems, rain gardens or bump outs, get constructed, finished, graded, and then are left for months until they are planted. Currently, sites are being covered with geotextile or erosion control fabric. By the time we get to plant, our created or imported soils are often infested with weeds, which becomes a new management issue for us. I want to encourage the use of cover crops instead of fabric. Do you have any recommendations on cover crops to use? And if so, do you have recommendations on prepping a site for planting that has been planted with a cover crop? Should we shear the cover crop and plant within it or till the cover crop?
Well, first of all, as far as the last part of that question, tilling is something that I pretty much avoid like the plague. When you till soil, you are bringing up millions of weed seeds that were too deep to germinate, but are still viable. You're creating this roughed up seed bed where everything that blows in is in a wonderful condition to germinate. So, in almost every case, we are trying to avoid tilling, first of all. Second of all, one of the things that I think people don't understand and is about weeds in the early stages um, that you were referring to initially is when you remove whatever was there that you didn't want, or when you bring in new bare soil that is just bare soil exposed, all of a sudden you get a flush of whatever weed seeds or whatever seeds were in that soil. And in our world, especially in Philadelphia, where things have been so disturbed and invasive plants have been around all over the place distributing seeds, a high percentage of the seeds in the soil are weeds, things we don't want. And so consequently, when you bring in soil or if you till soil, you need to expect there's going to be a big flush of weeds. And so it is actually, and it sounds in a way inadvertently like that's the way your projects are going down. Instead of you bring in and you spread the soil, don't plant right away because that newly spread soil is full of weed seeds, especially if it's in Philadelphia. Let those weeds germinate, and whether you're doing it organically or with chemicals, get rid of those weeds and then plant. The point here is exhaust the weed seed bank that's already in the soil to an extent so that when you plant, there are less weeds in the soil. Let them germinate, get rid of them organically, chemically, whichever is your preferred method, and then plant with a reduced seed bank.
Do you want to mention the if any of these sites were originally turf grass, the turf grass as weed mitigator idea of a transition kind of approach that we were just talking about today?
Yeah, and this relates to a fairly experimental and very successful project that we have been doing at Sarah's front yard in suburban Philadelphia. And this is pretty interesting stuff. Sarah asked me to assist her in doing converting her yard to a meadow, and it's a small area. This is a neighborhood with small properties. This is not big acreage. And Sarah could tell you how many square feet it is. I don't remember, but it's a small front yard.
About
And
5,000.
yeah, 5,000 square feet. So Sarah requested, she wanted to put together a protocol to convert it to meadow, but she put on me some pretty strict parameters. One of them, no chemicals, no herbicides. Two, no major heavy lifting, hard work, meaning, for instance, stripping off the side and hauling it off and dumping it somewhere. No heavy soil disturbance, meaning tilling it all up. And finally, no extended period where it was ugly and was going to provoke the neighbors. So there's a lot of limitations there. And so the strategy that we did is to do everything we could do, not to remove and kill the grass outright, but to weaken it, to make it unhappy. And whatever we did to make the turf grass unhappy had to be something that the meadow plants could tolerate, creating an infertile situation by adding sulfur, which decreases the pH and ties nutrients to the plants, cutting it at the time of year when the turf grass is most actively growing, but the meadow isn't. There's a lot, that could be talked about it. However, the point is we planted not just into the happy, healthy turf grass, but planted into significantly weakened turf grass to the point where the turf grass was not so dense and thick that it would prohibit the seed germination of the meadow plants. So now the meadow plants are germinating with the turf grass. Now we mow it at a time of year that would favor the meadow over the turf grass. And there's more intricacy to this than I, can go into in this particular. We're doing presentations on this, so feel free to sign up for it and you'll get the whole story. But the point is, by not killing the turf grass outright and then planting the seeds of the meadow, we basically avoided opening it up to germination of weed seeds. It was again, gradual transition. It's like my favorite term these days. Don't kill today, plant tomorrow. Have a plan for a gradual transition, one that understands the plants, the proclivities of the plants you want to diminish and the plants that you want to encourage. And over time, and we're not talking about 10 years, in 3 years, and to some extent in 2 years, we had a pretty nice meadow. I was there today, actually, this morning, and it's really kind of stunning after 3 years. So the idea of gradual transition can avoid chemicals, can avoid a lot of heavy lifting, and can also avoid denuding a place, which is an invitation to a heavy weed influx.
Yes. Okay, I want to get to another question. Thank you for that. Um, how do you cooperate with deer in a native planted landscape?
That's a very good question, and I think the word cooperate is very interesting. Um, a lot of folks just want to exclude the deer because they're eating a lot of plants. And if anybody says, "Oh, plant native plants because the deer don't like them," no, that's not true. Just like any other plant from any other region, there's some deer like and some deer don't like. Um, and they can be excluded by a deer fence. That's obvious, one obvious way if you don't want them to be eating your plants. But there was a cooperation word in there, which I find very interesting and is relevant to my property. Here's what I learned many years ago from planting meadows. A meadow is not a plant here, space, a plant there, space. A meadow is dense, intermingled multiple species of plants. They're growing together. They're intertwined. And some of those native meadow plants are very palatable to deer, and some of them they don't eat. They don't eat the native grasses. They don't eat anything in the mint family. They don't eat the milkweeds. On the other hand, they love asters. They love coneflower. But if those suites of plants are intermingled, they can't bite and or eat one plant that's palatable without also getting a mouthful of something that's not palatable. So this intermingled composition in a meadow, even though there are some of the plants in the meadow are palatable to deer and they'd be very happy to eat them, are being those plants are being protected because they're intermingled with ones that the deer won't eat. So, okay, plant a meadow from seed where it all comes up intermingled and you're in pretty good shape from deer. You're not needing to exclude them. However, that's the meadow. We extrapolated a strategy outside of meadows to achieve the same effect. You want to plant a wildflower garden in the woods? Well, they don't eat ferns and they don't eat native woodland sedges, but they do eat woodland asters. They do eat woodland phlox. So if you take a native fern and a native phlox, they don't like the fern, they do like the phlox, and you plant them in the same hole. From day one, a deer can't get a bite of the phlox that it likes without also getting a bite of the fern that it doesn't like, and consequently, it leaves it alone. Or what it does, if there's a little branch of the phlox sticking up out of the fern, it'll chew on that until it gets down to where it's mixed with the fern and then it will stop. So this idea of intermingled dense ground layer plantings is a strategy, whether it's meadow or not, that is not causing the need to exclude the deer, is even allowing them to have a little bit of food where they can find plants that are by themselves and not intermingled with undesirable stuff or stuff that's not palatable. And that's what's going on in my little third of an acre property in the suburbs of Philadelphia. There's no lawn, and it's all dense intermingled ground layer plantings underneath the trees, shrubs, and there are deer that are present. I wouldn't say it's the highest population of deer around, so maybe it's not the best example, but they have done very little damage in that landscape. I've been very surprised at how little damage because they are present. And I think it's the intermingled nature of the vegetation and the fact that there's just so much there. It's not like three-quarters lawn and little beds on the outside. The whole place, except for some mowed paths and some stone sitting areas and whatnot, is all dense vegetation. So I think in a way, the intermingled is a lot of it, but the fact that they're just overwhelmed with so much stuff that they're just not eating it all.
So I know we're at about 6:30. I do want to hang around for a few more minutes and answer a couple more questions if you don't mind,
Oh, if you'll
Laura.
make me, yeah, happy,
Um,
happy to do it.
cool. So just for anyone who might need to hop off, I am going to send an email after the session when the recording is viewable. We'll post it and all of that. It'll be freely viewable. And just check out our website for upcoming programs. We're going to kick off our fall virtual series this September with a free 30-minute session presentation from Larry at home with nature. So it's kind of an introduction and foundational ideas of ecological gardening. So if you want kind of from the beginning these concepts, you can join us on that. And then we'll have some other really great sessions. And if you're in the Philly area, we are holding a free in-person program called Native Landscaping 101. I'm excited about that. So yes, and check out ndal.org for more. But I want to answer some more questions if we can. Here we go. As a design consultant in the South who is hoping to help clients consider meadow landscapes, could you share your own experiences or stories from starting out? What types of processes helped you influence your first clients to consider meadow or ecological design options? Was this different for commercial versus residential?
Yeah, good question. It seems to refer to or mentions, my first clients, early days. Um, yeah, I mean, one of the things I did, meadow and otherwise early on, I mean, I've been doing this for over 40 years. So when I was starting out in the early days, unlike now, there were very few people interested in native plants. There was very little connection between landscape gardening and wildlife habitat. These things really didn't exist. I was interested in it and I was practicing it, not as sophisticated as I might be doing now, but in the early stages of really learning how to do this. Um, but as a professional dealing with clients who in that time period, and there's still plenty of folks that are still, have that attitude, it wasn't native plants and wildlife and nature was not really so much part of what they were looking for. And so consequently, while I was interested in that and uh, 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 taking that approach, I was also listening to what they wanted to accomplish and made sure that I wasn't asking them to spend their hard-earned money for the good of the world. I was really there to create a landscape that they were going to enjoy. And what I learned very quickly is whatever that landscape is that they are looking for, it can be done with native plants, whether it's a formal garden they're looking for, or whether it's something with a succession of bloom and multicolored, whatever it is, you can do it with native plants. Particularly if you have learned a wide variety of those species and what they do, and expanded out of limiting yourself to just the uh, 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 mostly exotic plants that are used in ornamental gardens. So I think the best advice I can give is not to be polemic about it, to really listen to what these folks are trying to accomplish. Don't try to force anything down their throat, and make sure that they understand that while I'm a native plant guy, I'm not a purist about it. There is no reason that I can't include non-native plants, left to my own devices. That's what I'm going to do. But if a client has a particular interest in a plant or a group of plants or a style of garden, I'm going to try to accomplish that for them, and also bring to the table the things that I also consider is important, such as using native plants for wildlife habitat and to create more self-sufficient landscapes. Um,
Lily wants to know what's a good native plant to grow that will shade out stilt grass. There's this growing in a wooded, shaded area.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will tell you the category of plants, say ground layer plants that are the ones down in the lower regions that would be directly competing um, with Japanese stiltgrass, are plants that are what are called rhizomatous or clonal plants. That means it's a plant that doesn't grow in a clump. It has a root system that expands and sends dense shoots up as it is expanding. And those plants are very competitive, and would be your best friend in trying to win the battle over something like stiltgrass. And some of the plants that might be used for that purpose, and stiltgrass generally is growing in somewhat shadier areas, maybe moist if it's in the sun. So the plants I'm going to give you are plants that are adapted to that kind of condition. But pink turtlehead, Chelone lyonii is the botanical name, Pachyra aureus, golden groundsel, hardy mistflower, Conoclinium colestinum, are some of the plants that you can expect to really maybe overtake ferns. Stiltgrass, New York fern. But the thing to look for are plants that are aggressive root spreaders. Those are the most competitive ones. And the way to make it happen is, and you can always spray and kill the stilt grass first, but I'm assuming that the interest here, and I'm all for it, is to avoid that, is to A, use aggressive clonal expanding plants that can compete out stilt grass, and B, when there's space in between those new plants that you're planting, just weed whip to the ground or mow the stilt grass in between those plants to prevent it from going to seed. Because if you recall, still, as I mentioned earlier, stilt grass is an annual. It's only going to persist in the landscape if it produces and distributes seeds. And so if you're planting aggressive clonal plants and weed whipping the stilt grass to prevent it from ever going to seed, you're favoring the plants that didn't get cut, the ones you planted, and you're preventing this stilt grass from forming a heavy crop of seed so that it persists the next year. And again, how quick does it take? It depends on how close you planted the clonal aggressive plants, and how fast the growing species you picked. But in general, after a couple of years, not tomorrow, not the day after you planted it, but after a year, two, maybe three, you can transfer into a dominated composition of the plants, the non-stilt grass native plants that you put into the landscape.
Do you use Roundup as one of your herbicides?
We don't use Roundup. We do sometimes use glyphosate. Roundup, the active ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate. It is a non-specific herbicide that kills most plants. There is an additive called a surfactant that goes into Roundup that has shown to be toxic to amphibians and that does persist in the landscape. Actual glyphosate appears to diminish its presence in the landscape very quickly. And this includes ecologists. Most ecologists whose life is about nature and habitat creation and native plants feel that glyphosate in its pure form without that surfactant is one of the least is one of the most environmentally benign materials that you can use. Now, there's lawsuits going on about Roundup, and there's a lot of discussion about cancer and other things. What I would say to you is look up the research. If you're considering using that material, it's controversial, not controversial just in that it's terrible and it should never be used. Even among very environmentally conscious people, there is controversy about whether or not it is as problematic as the lawsuits and things are making it out to be. So, I'm just giving you the real story here, the inside story of people that are actually working to try to make native landscapes work. And what I'll say about herbicide in general is, and we're moving away from it in most instances, but there's times where a particular a very noxious weed is pervasive in a place, and without using it, you cannot convert that pervasive weed into native plants. So the thought process of whether it's yes or no on herbicides is not just, do I want to use herbicides? No, I don't ever want to use herbicides. If that's the only question, the answer is easy. But the real question is, if I'm in a situation where I am unable to convert an exotic, invasive, dominated landscape to a highly diverse, wildlife supportive landscape without the use of herbicide because the plant that's there now is particularly pernicious, it's not a question of, do I want to use herbicide or not? I don't. It's a question of, is it more important to have a temporary use of herbicide to be able to turn it into a highly ecologically productive landscape, or leave it as it is, dominated by one invasive plant that has little ecological value? That's where you're getting into the nuance of the question of herbicides or not. But the last thing I'll say, going back to the description of Sarah's yard, where we converted lawn to herbicide, one of the best ways to avoid the use of it, and one of the categories of strategies that our firm is continually looking at, is this gradual transformation from undesirable to desirable, whether it's turf or an invasive weed to a native landscape of any type. And that's where a real consider, and whichever way you land, is completely understandable and is okay. But all I would ask is think about the big picture. Think about the what you can accomplish at times. On the other hand, when it can be done without it, then do it without it, and that's our basic approach. Let's do one more,
I was
Sarah.
just
No,
gonna
we
say,
don't. I don't want
yes,
to end with the herbicide question.
yeah, yeah.
I didn't avoid it. I gave you my story, but let's not end with it. Go ahead.
Okay. Someone says, I'm planning on planting 2 inch by 5 inch deep plugs this fall in my front yard and trying to establish a meadow here in Houston, Texas. I run a native nursery, grow out lots of these plugs for clients. I'm looking to scalp the ground with a string trimmer, probably a couple of times this month and next month, then planting and mulching with hay in the fall. I'm also thinking of smothering with cardboard and hay for the next few months. Any tips on site prep with no chemicals or sod cutter?
Yeah, well, you can smother. Smothering is an excellent way to do it. So I would encourage that. The questioner asked about plugs, and they said 2 by 5 inch. That's the right plugs. There are tiny little plugs that you can buy that are very shallow rooted and they're very hard to keep alive. But what they call deep root plugs, which is what the questioner was referring to, is more like 5 inches deep. And those plants, even though they're kind of small, they're not potted perennials. There's a deeper root system that you're planting there, so they're much more survivable. But the one thing I will say about smothering, it's a good strategy. It works. You're killing off the live plants that were there. So you're removing the competition for the plugs or the seed or whatever you're going to plant. But the one thing you need to know is you put down your cardboard or newspaper or whatever it is that you're using to smother and kill the undesirable existing vegetation. And then you pull it up and that stuff's all dead and that's good. But there's one further thing to consider. That vegetation that you just killed, prior to killing it, it was suppressing weed seeds. And once you killed it, those weed seeds are released. So I'm glad you asked this question because this is a keystone one that is often misunderstood. When you pull up the cardboard, don't plant right away. Let the weeds germinate. And as they're coming up, rake them off. Obviously, using cardboard or smothering, you didn't want to use herbicide. That's fine. So you're not going to use herbicide to get the seed bank as it's growing. The point is, don't plant right away because you're going to get a flush of weeds that have been released by killing the existing vegetation. Let the weeds germinate, kill them off, usually by raking them off when they're still little or spraying them with a organic vinegar-based herbicide, which will kill, new seedlings, and then seed. The idea is to exhaust the weed seed bank for a while and then seed, and you will have less weed competition with the seeds or plugs that you plant.
All right, thank you so much. Um, yeah, thanks everyone for joining. There's lots more opportunities if your question didn't get answered today to get your questions answered. We have actually 2 home gardener 3-part virtual intensive courses coming up this September. One is more general on ecological gardening and landscape design, and one is about meadow making in particular. So feel free to join us on those and our virtual series and in person events. And I'll hang out here for just another couple minutes if anyone has any questions about NDAL or our upcoming programs or anything. We have other speakers too. So thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.